Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses the potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rodgers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing lightning protection and grounding best practices for emergency service facilities. I want to welcome Tom LaBarge to the program. Tom is the CEO of GroundLinx Technologies, and he is here to provide some things your organization should consider when protecting your facilities and equipment from lightning strikes and electrical surges. Tom, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure being here, and hopefully we can communicate some very important information to your listeners today, Chris.
I think we're going to do that today. So, Tom, lightning can be a finicky animal. When it decides to show up, it's going to find the path of least resistance, and it's going to get in there, and it's going to tear up a lot of sensitive equipment. So, with that being said, why should our customers regularly evaluate the state of their facilities in terms of electrical grounding and lightning protection?
Well, and that's a very important question, Chris, and to answer it, and this could take quite a while, but to answer it, let's start with some basics. First of all, lightning, as you said, it's an outrageous amount of energy in a very, very tiny space. And it will cook virtually anything it gets its hands on, so to speak. It's completely unpredictable. You don't know where it's going to go. You can kind of encourage it to go one direction or another. But the most important thing is to know that what you're trying to protect, what you're trying to avoid being damaged, you need to have a really robust grounding system in place. The trouble is, 99.9% of the population doesn't even know what a grounding system is or how electricity works. So let's start with some basics. And then for a lot of people, this will be like washing paint dry. I hope to make it better than that. But you really need to understand the basics of electricity before we can even discuss how to evaluate what you've got. So here we go. And all electrical systems, everything electrical, absolutely must be efficiently and completely grounded. It's got to have a place to get to Earth. That's where electricity wants to go. And so we got to have it a good place, a good way for it to get there. In a nutshell, what happens in electricity, again, this is the basics, and I hope this isn't too boring, but what happens, electricity is nothing more than portable energy. And we spin a big wheel called a generator with another thing called an exciter. And we spin a magnet and an electrical in a coil, and it makes electrons run into a pipe. That pipe we call a wire, but it's really just a big pipe, and it's got the equivalent of water flowing through it, but it's electricity. And what we do is we put work in front of or at the end of that pipe, like run a light bulb or charge a Tesla or run a big electric motor. We put work in the way, and that portable energy that's being routed down that pipe does something for us. When it's done, we've got to return it. We got to send it back to Earth. That's the only way the system balances out. So everything electrical has a ground. It goes back to Earth. In a way, it goes back to the generating plant to balance things out. So it's a very, very efficient means of transporting energy. And when it's controlled and managed correctly, we can have it do some absolutely amazing things. But when we get out of bounds, when the energy levels get too high, as in lightning or surges, a lot of things really bad happen. And now it's even more badder. Sorry about that, but it's really bad now because everything's gone electronic.
Absolutely.
And electronic devices are incredibly sensitive to variations in voltage. Have I bored everybody to death yet? I hope not.
Well, right now is the last time that you definitely don't want to try to replace electronics right now because you never know when you're going to get them because that supply chain is still hasn't worked itself out. So if those things go down, getting replacements, it's going to be much harder than it was 3 years ago. So protecting those things is even more vital today, I think, than ever before.
That's correct, and well, even more so in that many of our listeners here are involved in public safety. Downtime in public safety is due to equipment failure is just not an option. We're talking mission critical. You got to have instant backup. If something bad happens, you got to be able to get back on the air pretty darn quickly, and hopefully not be knocked off the air to begin with. Well, anyway, back to lightning. We know it's a monster. It's extremely dangerous. We've known this for hundreds of years, and thanks to a guy named Ben Franklin, pretty smart guy, he was able to prove that lightning was an electrical event. No, there was no key on the kite string. Trust me on that. But he wasn't holding on to the kite string was wet silk. He wasn't holding on to it.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, but
Absolutely. So we know that lightning is an electrical event, and our efforts to minimize the damage it causes have been, since Ben Franklin, have been focused on saving structures from fire. What Ben was worried about was lightning hitting your barn and burning your barn down. That was bad for a farmer to lose all of his crops and livestock and whatever, or hitting your house. So he came up with the idea of a lightning rod. He never really did develop the grounding idea, but the whole idea of grounding was to protect structures. That has not really changed, except, well, starting about 100 years ago when electricity started to come into common use around the country. It was a little bit earlier than that, 1880s, but in the 1930s with TVA and rural electrification, electricity starts finding its way all across the United States. And at that point, we started to take grounding up to a different performance standard. It was there to allow electrical systems to work better and to mildly protect certain appliances from little variations in voltage. So about 100 years ago, we made some improvements in the idea of grounding. The bad news is nothing's changed. We're still using technology and techniques from 100 years ago to do our electrical grounding, in spite of the fact that electronics didn't exist then and do run everything we are concerned with now, absolutely everything. Yet the grounding that's in place is not there to protect it. To a certain extent, the old traditional grounding was great for analog devices. They ran on heat. When you get right down to it, they had to warm up. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember
I have
that.
a tube amp. I play in a band and I have a couple of tube amps. So
yeah,
familiar with the heat that those things radiate.
And they're happy with it. They work better with it, as it turns out. Electronic, integrated circuits, heat is not their friend, and heat is not the friend of resistance either, as it turns out. So anyway, we've got some changes that have been made, and it hasn't come to grounding. So it becomes now, because you're all electronic, as a facility manager, if that's who's listening in this case, if you don't understand what's in place at your facility, there are going to be some problems. It's really good to start to look for, to begin to understand the grounding that's in place at your facility. Let's just put it that way. I can just about guarantee that what you have in place right now is obsolete. Even if it's been maintained, it's probably obsolete. That's not the point. There are ways to make obsolete systems work okay. There are ways to make grounding, even in its oldest form, work okay, as long as it's not broken. That's where this inspection or audit comes in. We got to make sure that what's in place is big enough and brassy enough, forgive the reference to a metal there, but big enough and brassy enough to handle all the trials that it's going to get, and that it's in the right place, so that any of these big faults that come along, as it's the word that's used in the electrical business, a fault is a surge or a spike or a lightning strike. It's a major overvoltage. Sometimes they're called transients. You got to make sure that those can't get inside your building. Once they're inside, all bets are off. So a good grounding system is designed to keep everything outside your building. A better grounding system also has a failsafe in it, such that if something does get inside, a bad guy gets inside and starts dancing around looking for equipment to fry, that there's a superhighway for that voltage to get outside of your building and get to ground, to balance out everything and be harmless.
So I want to kind of echo on something that you mentioned in your comments earlier when you talked about an inspection and audit process. I assume that you mean on your end, but in risk control, we go out and we do surveys of our clients, and we obviously see towers if they have them. Sometimes we come across towers that aren't grounded at all, or we're not sure if they're properly grounded. And we always, or not always, we routinely make recommendations on having those systems checked by a licensed contractor or a grounding organization. So if our customers are going down that road and they don't know anything about the grounding process, what's involved in the evaluation or an audit process to kind of get them prepared?
Okay, let's go at a very basic level here, which is fine. Again, I think I've mentioned 99.9% of the population doesn't know anything about this anyway. Any step up from there is a really good thing. So you need to make sure you've got big enough pipes in place, and the routing has to be correct. So let's start by going to your electric meter. Certainly you can find your electric meter on your building. There may be several of them, but typically there's one that stands out. And at every electric meter, there'll be, unless it's I don't get the technical stuff, but a standard electric meter will have a ground wire coming out of it. Sometimes it's in a conduit, but there'll be a wire there it's about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. That's typically a number 6 wire, sometimes a number 8 wire. Don't worry about that. There won't be a quiz on this, by the way, and there will not be a quiz on anything I say here. So you can relax on that. But there's a ground wire coming out of it, and typically it's tied into a single ground rod. Now, code says it's supposed to have 2, but in commercial establishments, sometimes that doesn't really get enforced that well. Anyway, there may be 1 or 2 ground rods that are attached to this wire coming out of your electric meter. Make sure it's there. That's the first thing. Now, ground rods have tremendous limitations, but that's what the code says. So we're going to go with that. Just make sure that wire's there and make sure it's firmly connected. It'll be mechanically connected, but make sure it's really firmly connected and not covered with corrosion where it makes contact with a ground rod, if you can find that ground rod or 2. That's the first step. The next step, if you have a tower, take a walk to the tower. And there are several things that are going on at a tower. Number one, each leg of the tower, typically there are 3. I've been involved in doing some older 4-legged towers, which are kind of interesting. They're not real stable. Each leg will have a big wire. Well, it's supposed to be big, welded onto it, and that will go to a buried ring around the tower, and there'll be a variety of ground rods there. Make sure that each one of those legs has a good-sized wire connected to it, and it's going somewhere. Sometimes you just pull on one of those wires to see if it's firmly in the ground. Also, on towers, there are big coaxial cables coming down from the antennae. Those will have big lumps on them. It looks like a lump in the middle of a snake. It's called a grounding kit. And from that, there'll be a wire that comes out of that lump, and it will go to what's called a bus bar, which is a big copper bar attached to the tower somewhere. Should be insulated from the tower. And that will eventually go to a grounding device at some point. Make sure every one of those coax lines has one of those ground kits on, has a lump in it somewhere. The perfect setup has one of those every 100 feet going up the tower, or actually some people say every 50 feet. But make sure there's at least one lump on each coax line at the bottom of the tower that goes to a grounding device.
So are your evaluations, are they external only, or do you all get inside and look at the grounding once those cables have entered the building?
I'll get to the inside in just a second, but in our case, and I hope anybody that is retained by any of your insureds will do a thorough internal evaluation as well. But let's stay outside right now, because that's where most of the action is going to happen. Now, the source of the problem is outside. Let's address that completely first. Then, where those coax cables go into your building, there's typically a thing called a bulkhead, and it too has to have grounding connections on it going to a grounding device. And by the way, all these grounding devices, I don't expect an insured to be digging around to find all this, but every grounding device at your site has to be interconnected. They cannot be independent. And the reason for that is if one is infected, shall we say, has to take a big charge, If it's not connected to another grounding system, it will just dispense it into the ground, and that grounding system will pick it up and send it back inside the building. So that condition is called equipotential. Again, there will not be a quiz. Equipotential just means equal potential, equal voltage. If there's no voltage, there's no current. So if everything's connected, there can't be any voltage. Everything has to be connected. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. In a very wound up, serious technical audit, we would definitely check and anybody that is brought in by any of your insureds needs to make sure that the grounding system is completely interconnected and in a state of equipotential. I'm going to go to one more thing. Go ahead. You have another question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. This is really, really important. These are all things that are easy to find around your facility. The towers and bulkheads and coax lines and electric meters. And the thought in traditional grounding is that all of these bad things happen because of strikes to the tower or the building. The sharp, pointy things. Those are, some people call them, that's a lightning magnet right there. Well, yeah, it can happen, but it's actually only about 1/3 in our experience, and this is primarily in the southeast of the United States, but only 1/3 of damage events from lightning and overvoltage events happen because of a strike to a structure or a broadcast tower. 2/3, over 2/3 actually, is referred into the structure on inbound commercial power, on inbound electric service. And the reason for that is that there is virtually no lightning protection on the electric distribution system that is effective with respect to electronics. Absolutely nothing.
So you talked about, individuals who are responsible for maintaining these facilities, kind of doing a self-inspection. What type of self-evaluations are we talking about? Is it a visual inspection, or are we hooking up?
All visual.
All visual.
Okay. All visual right now. All visual. I don't expect you to do any more. And
no digging or hooking up meters or anything like that.
No. This is just for the insurer to find out basically what's in place and what may be wrong. It may be a really, really good system, and there may not have been any losses. If there had been losses, yeah, you want to get a little more detailed. If you have had regular losses, you definitely want to consider hiring a professional auditor who will know what to look for and hook up meters and dig holes and map your entire facility.
So let's go from the scenario that our client has went around and they've made the determination that they need to have one of these audits done. What should our customers expect from lightning protection audits, and more importantly, what action should they take based on these results of these audits?
Again, these questions are fabulous. Here's a great analogy. Many of your insureds, and many of the people listening here, hopefully today, have purchased a house. And in the process of purchasing that house, they had a home inspection done. It's exactly what we're talking about here. A professional auditor will pursue this inspection of your lightning protection system just like a home inspector would. We're not going to be looking for holes in the roof or bad framing or plumbing leaks. Well, in a way, we are looking for plumbing leaks, but it's that kind of evaluation that we're looking at. It can be very, very detailed. Also, similar to a home inspection, I guarantee you the inspector is going to find problems because grounding is so overlooked and so unknown by so many people, including electricians. The company that I'm involved with is in this business because of an event that happened at my house. And hopefully there's a little time to tell this little less than 60-second story. If it's there, I'm going to go ahead with it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I say that 99.9% of the population doesn't understand grounding or even know what it is in many cases, and that applies to electricians as well, believe it or not. I built my house in North Georgia in 2014, 2013 actually, finished in 14, And I had done all the inside wiring, but I don't do any of the outside wiring. That's beyond my pay grade, and I don't want to play with those kind of danger levels. So I hired an electrician to build my service, as it's called. And he did that, and one of the final steps was putting in a grounding system. But I didn't even know 10 years ago what a grounding system was. And I was up on the main deck looking down at my electrician pounding these rods in the ground. And I thought that was kind of curious. And I yelled down to him, didn't yell, but I spoke down to him. I said, "Hey, John, what are those?" And he looked up at me and he said, "We call them ground rods." and I said, "What do they do?" And he looked back at me with a straight face and he said, "I don't know. We just have to put them in.
Follow the code."
And what he did, he put in the two rods, and they're 6 feet apart, and they're outside the drip line, and blah, 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 blah. And they were hooked up with a certain gauge wire, and everything was absolutely to code.
That's funny. There's a carpenter on YouTube who that's basically everything. He does something and then he says that's the code. That's his mantra. So I guess that spans across all kinds of contractors.
Well, here's the bad part. It was exactly 8 months later that my house got hit by lightning. And every electronic device in the house got cooked. The ground rods were there. They were in code. Everything was done right. I lost cable boxes. I lost refrigerator, washer, dryer, air conditioning units, TVs, stereo, everything gone. So what I'm getting at is, why did they have the ground rods there? They didn't do jack. And that got me started on analyzing grounding. And I'm a professional geek. And so I pursued this in detail and found out that a lot of things in code are wrong. But it's the best we've got. That's what people will say. It's the best we've got.
So, looking forward, if a client does integrate this into their ongoing maintenance process and facility inspection process, looking forward, what will an expanded and more active approach to lightning protection do for our customers?
Well, let me go back to the previous question just a little bit first, and what we want to, what do they expect out of the inspection? The inspection should give them a really good indication of what kind of risk they're facing. And then it's going to be up to the facility manager to say, okay, that's an unacceptable risk for me to take, or I'm good with that. I can let it go. That information, the inspection should give a lot of ammunition to the facility manager to know and balance what kind of budgets are involved and what the danger has been, and have there been are there massive insurance costs involved, or are there massive risks involved, or there's a particular market that there may be some listeners to this podcast on that insurance is so expensive. And I don't mean to talk about bad things about insurance companies. And I'm not. They're wonderful institutions, but insurance becomes very, very expensive because the lightning is so common.
Right.
It's a difficult situation. So it's up to the manager to determine with this information given by the inspection what the appropriate level of risk is and what the costs are involved. So your next question, again, let me repeat if I can. Well, maybe you'll have to repeat it here.
What's that expanded approach going to what's an expanded approach? Being more actively engaging in lightning protection activities, kind of like we do with sprinkler systems. We do those, annual inspections. You mentioned that grounding is kind of put to the wayside compared to some of these other systems. So what would an expanded approach do for our customers?
What we say in grounding, in the grounding business, lightning protection business, is grounding and lightning protection are not problems. People don't see them as problems at all. They don't think about them. And they're not a problem right up until the point where it's a really, really big problem. So if you put this on your list of things to do annually, just to make sure things are working, or if you've had a loss, if you're familiar with what you've got, it's easier to start to pinpoint what the problem is and to create a management and budgetary solution so that it stops happening in the future. I think that's the biggest benefit. And again, if we're talking public safety, downtime is just not acceptable. If you have to go back to dispatching by telephone, I mean, well, we've got lives in the balance at that point sometimes. We can't have that situation. So we need you to be really, really familiar with things that can cause your equipment to fail, and lightning and overvoltages and electrical problems in a world that is run entirely by electronics is really, really important to do. That can be the biggest help for your customers. To be that much more familiar, and to be able to speak with even with the technician that may come out to do the inspection. This is what I found. This is let's see if we can figure out a better way to do this, so I don't have this risk or I don't suffer these losses again.
Well, let's do a radio quality segue here. You said to speak to the technician about what they found. So what is the next step if one of our customers wants to reduce the major risks associated with lightning and electrical surge events?
Oh, the contact an inspector. That is a very, very familiar with the latest developments, shall we say, in lightning protection. There's been a lot of research that's come out in the last 10, 15 years that, well, the general feeling is that lightning, and I keep saying lightning as opposed to surge events, but this applies to across the board. But the general belief has been that lightning is just a DC event, a direct current event. As it turns out, it's not. There are AC characteristics, alternating current characteristics in every lightning strike. And the very front of a lightning strike is where all this bad stuff happens. And again, talking a little bit technically, but it's usually within the first 8 microseconds. And a microsecond is 1/millionth of a second. So 8 millionths of a second, a lot of this AC stuff happens. And the traditional protection methods that are out there can't catch up with this. You're going to lose your stuff. Okay, so you need to get somebody who knows a lot about lightning currently, and how can you build a system that is going to be more effective in preventing your electronics, or as they say in the business, preventing the smoke from getting out of the box. Go ahead. I heard you.
You mentioned that there's been several resources, or a lot of resources that have been developed. Can you point our listeners to any of those specifically that might help them out?
There's no simple publication on those, although, as it turns out, and I don't want to be commercial with this, but on our website, we do have a library, and there are references on that library to some of these research documents, and also to white papers that we've written as well and released into the research community. And that is just www.groundlinx.com. That's GROUNDLINX as an X-ray. And there's a library tab, and that can give you a little bit of background on it. But the key thing is get a hold of somebody who's very well versed in current research and current standards on lightning. We don't want somebody who's just that's Joe's Lightning Protection Company that goes in and pounds in 24 more ground rods and hooks them up with some little wire. That happens too much. So that would be the next step. If you contact us, we will route you to some people that we've done business with. We can't be all over the country, that's for sure. Right. But we can suggest a number of individuals, and we'd be more than happy to do that. That are regionally located, that can be of some assistance. But that's just a matter of contacting us at info@groundlinx.com.
That's what I was going to say. Is that the best way to contact your organization? Is through that email?
Yes. Just email info@groundlinx.com. And in most cases, it'll be me responding. In that case, I monitor that email address much more than anybody else in our company. But we can route you in the right direction. Awesome. and get you started to understanding what you've got and managing your risk a little bit better to reduce downtime issues and reduce costs. Simple as that. That's the biggest benefit.
Well, Tom, we try to keep these programs at around the 30-minute mark, so we're kind of running up against it. Are there any last key thoughts or points that you wanted to make before we finished up today?
I can't think of anything more than all the ramblings I've already said. All I can stress is electronics are incredibly sensitive, and everything in your facility is at risk, much more so now than it has been in the past. Expenses are going up, supply chains are a problem, and as I alluded to, one of the biggest problems is inbound electric current. You definitely have to have grounding really in great shape on your inbound power, and that includes your power and your telephone and your cable. All of that has to be really, really airtight, because that's where problems are going to occur, and they will get inside your building and they will wreak havoc, and you'll be off the air, and that's not what we want.
Absolutely.
We want safety, and we want cost reductions and happy people. That's what we're after.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us today and providing all this great information. It's definitely something that should be integrated into a facility inspection program. So I think that this gives some good insight as to what our clients can do, and then when it's time to, to call on the professionals. So, Tom, it was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time today.
It's been my pleasure indeed, Chris, and I look forward to being of assistance to any of your customers that should they wish.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program today and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guest, Tom LaBarge, once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.